Hello and welcome. My name's Dominic Frisby and today's piece is called Fiat Money Collapse, the Remonetization of Gold and Hyperbitcoinization. Now, cards on the table, a Western fiat money collapse along the lines of Zimbabwe, Venezuela or Weimar hyperinflation, despite unsustainable deficit spending and unpayable government debt, is not something I think we're likely to see. Many more knowledgeable souls than myself deem it inevitable. But more probable, in my view, is just the continued debasement of currency and the erosion of its value. So that with the incremental effects of compounding, a generation from now, fiat will have lost another 90% or more of its purchasing power. Heck, the pound has already lost a third of its value just this decade. Since the beginning of the century, it's fallen by over 90%. I guess that constitutes collapse. It all hangs on how you define collapse, I suppose, and over what time frame. Yet there is one scenario that I can envisage that could lead to a more rapid collapse, and it's one we might even be careering towards, and that is war. If tensions between East and West escalate into full-blown conflict, you can be sure the East will attack Western currencies, just as the US weaponized banking and the dollar following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China has lots of gold, as we know, much more than it says it does. Russia has plenty. Shanghai cooperation nations are all accumulating. Meanwhile, American gold hasn't been audited for decades, casting doubts over whether it even exists. And as for British gold, I wonder what happened to that. In short, Western fiat money is vulnerable should the East decide to attack it. For the time being, at least, I don't expect it to. I have to say that. China's got some $3.25 trillion in reserves, another $800 billion in US treasuries. Why collapse their value? But whether Biden or Trump wins in the US elections this autumn, neither is going to balance the books, nor will Labour here in the UK. So you know that both the pound and the dollar are going to see their value steadily eroded for the next 5 years. Deficit spending will continue and debts will increase. Indeed, outside of a full-on deflationary tightening, and I mean Paul Volcker in 1980 scale tightening, it is impossible for fiat money to see its purchasing power grow. Supply is going to increase and purchasing power will decline. This is built in, it's inherent, and it is inevitable. And that's why I advocate owning alternative non-government money, gold and Bitcoin. So today, I want to explore a scenario in which Western currencies come under attack and are forced to back their currencies with their gold. Russia briefly did this in March 2022. In other words, what happens to the gold price if gold gets remonetized? And similarly, I'm going to explore potential Bitcoin prices in the event of hyperbitcoinization. That's where Bitcoin becomes the dominant global money. So the remonetization of gold. Currently, the US has 261 million ounces of gold. Were it to use that gold to back its money, here are some possible scenarios. If you divide the US monetary base, which is $6 trillion, by its gold, you end up with a figure of $23,000 an ounce. If you divide M1, which is 18 trillion by its gold reserves, then you get a figure of $69,000 an ounce. If you divide US debt by its gold, and I couldn't believe this when I saw this figure, US debt is now 35 trillion. It was 20 trillion when I last looked. But if you divide its debt by its gold, in other words, if America were to use its gold to settle its debts, the gold price would have to be $134,000 an ounce. Now that's kind of a fantasy number, but it's an entertaining one nonetheless. So we turn now to the basket case that is Britain. And if you divide UK M1, which is £2.2 trillion, by the UK's gold reserves, about 1 million ounces, you get a figure of £2.2 million per ounce. If you divide the national debt, which is 3 trillion, by its gold, it's 3 million an ounce. Sterling is really vulnerable. We have so little gold. I know these are unrealistic numbers, but numbers like this become real at market extremes, particularly during inflationary panics. In 1980, shortly after the inauguration of Ronald Reagan, there was the Iranian hostage crisis, the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, both ongoing. The value of American gold holdings exceeded its monetary base by 150%. They amounted to about 20% of US national debt, which is about $1 trillion at the time. And as the veteran commentator Jim Sinclair once said, gold's role during periods of monetary stress is to balance the international balance sheet of the USA. Now, if you thought those numbers were big, what I have described is the gold bug's wet dream. Bitcoiners have a wet dream too, and that is hyperbitcoinization. And this would be the point at which Bitcoin becomes the world's leading money. And in this instance, we're talking about the store of value side of money rather than medium of exchange. So real estate, bonds, stock market, tracker funds, gold, these have all become places to park wealth until you can find something better to do with your money. Park wealth and preserve its purchasing power. It might be that you never find anything better to do with it. And more, we're going to see individuals, corporations, even nation states using Bitcoin for this purpose. And indeed, from MicroStrategy to El Salvador to readers of the Flying Frisbee, it's already happening. And Michael Saylor describes Bitcoin as digital real estate with this very scenario in mind. Now, currently, there are an estimated 50 million Bitcoin users worldwide, with approximately 1 million whole coiners, that is, people who own at least one Bitcoin. What if another 10 million people decide they want a whole Bitcoin? It puts a lot of upward pressure on the price. What if a load of billionaires or billion-dollar corporations decide they want a significant holding? That point of critical mass, hyper-Bitcoinization, then it comes into view. And this would be a foundational change to the way that global wealth is allocated. Many will see this scenario as fantasy, others will see it as inevitable. But technology is destiny. And with so much computer power behind it and its genius design, Bitcoin is, technologically, the best money out there. And just as gold is base money, it's nobody else's liability, so is Bitcoin digital base money. And perhaps the first major step towards hyper-Bitcoinization would be for Bitcoin's market cap to surpass that of global gold holdings. There are approximately 244,000 tons of gold in the world, and at 2,380 per ounce, the total worth of that gold is about 18.5 trillion. We'll round up the 19.7 million Bitcoins in existence in circulation to 20 million. If Bitcoin's market cap were to match that of gold, that equates to a figure of around $925,000 per coin. That's 18 trillion divided by 20 million. If Bitcoin were to compete with the S&P, well, the S&P's market cap, 44 trillion, you're looking $2.2 million per coin. Here are some values of other major markets. I'm not going to put the equivalent Bitcoin price because it just gets silly. But global equities, total global equities, have a value above 110 trillion. Global government bonds, closer to 140 trillion. US government bonds alone are above 50 trillion. Global real estate remains the world's biggest store of wealth, and that'll now be above $400 trillion. And as for total money supply, there are so many numbers bandied about, I'm not even going to attempt that one. Now, these kind of scenarios, they're out there, and whether one views them as fantasy or inevitable, the erosion of the purchasing power of fiat money is not going to stop, given its design, its inherent, and the political inevitabilities of this year's elections. So hold wealth in money they cannot debase. And if you're interested in buying gold, I put out a recent report on my Substack. I'll put a link in the article. There's also a report on buying Bitcoin. I've got a feeling gold's going to come in very handy in the not too distant future. My recommended bullion dealer, as always, is the Pure Gold Company. I put a link to them in the description. Thanks for you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and I will be back with another video very soon. In the meantime, goodbye.